they made a hard stance. They made an announcement. Ignore all rumors. They're not recasting. That is not going to happen. So I'm curious. Obviously, we know that Denzel Washington is going to be in the Black Panther 3.
So
He apologized for leaking that information, but he's going to be in Black Panther 3. So we're excited about that. We know for one thing there will not be another T'Challa.
I think in terms of moving the story forward, because you did, and I'm not saying you can't reboot the series and do another T'Challa, but because Ryan Coogler and them did a really great job at paying, homage to him in
Yeah.
that last film and actually genuinely killing the character because he lost the person he was going to follow through the film series with it. I think trying to redo Black Panther from that standpoint could be from the standpoint of like, and especially the storyteller Klugler is like, why not just sew it up with the direction that I've been moving in?
Okay.
In terms of the way I've been telling the story. I am glad that he hasn't succumbed to the pressures of people telling, or Disney for that matter, because Disney could just turn around and say, look, Ryan, I know you were going this way, but
Yeah.
you're rebooting with T'Challa.
Absolutely. They have notoriously been known for doing that,
Yeah,
for
so
just
they could
telling.
just say, this is what, that's why, there were a few people
Mhm.
in line to do Black Panther, or at least one before him. So,
Well, here's something too that because on one hand, I was just looking up Thaddeus Ross, which we all know is was originally played by William Hurt, right? It's now being played by Harrison Ford. So the role
yeah, that's what I'm
of
saying. Yeah.
such and such has been right, like they recasted him. So
And they let him rock out for a minute because he was in like the old, like
yeah,
they
yeah,
first
he went
introduced,
multiple. Yeah, he was before
they got the rights.
MCU. Yeah.
Yeah. He was, well, when they first introduced MCU, he
Mm,
was in the, I guess the Hulk that was going nowhere else.
Edward Norton.
Edward Norton Hulk.
Sorry.
Because remember, he played Liv Tyler's father in that.
Yeah.
And then the next thing that's in the credits, the, the scene in the credits is where we actually see Tony Stark come into the bar, and that introduced Iron Man.
Yeah.
So it they and William Hurt is an iconic actor, and you just like, yeah, cool, whatever. Though I mean, not that Harrison Ford is in it.
Yeah.
He played two of the biggest characters of all time
Yeah.
in terms of action films, and especially in terms of fantasy sci-fi films too. So I do think that if you're going to replace somebody with someone iconic, you have to do that. I think what you run into, and this is so true, like Chadwick Boseman is a once in a generation type of actor. I think that's why he was just such a huge loss to us, is because if you think about it, did you really know who was going to? You think about the Denzels getting older, the Morgan Freemans, the all of the guys that kind of came up during that time, or Forrest Whitaker. You thought, who is really going to fill those shoes in terms of people that their characters stay with you, right?
Hmm.
And who they are as actors stay with you, particularly for a Denzel, because he crossed so many lines uh, in terms of film. People, it wasn't just black people going out to watch Denzel. It was
Mm.
a lot of people that really enjoyed watching him. And I think that's the thing of that's what Chadwick Boseman kind of gave to people, was he
Okay.
was kind of that person that did that. And there are ones that are like, I maybe Denzel's son might become that eventually. John David, you see it in a Michael B. Jordan draws crowds of different backgrounds to theaters as well.
Hmm.
John Boyega's a little too outspoken for a lot of people, but he definitely, to me, is the type of actor that can bring people to the seats.
Hmm.
But I think this is where we've kind of gotten in the weeds with Hollywood in terms of, you see black men playing some really great roles, but not really getting the recognition for some great roles. So they're not, it's kind of like they're letting the legacy of what a Denzel Washington has in Hollywood. Because even Morgan Freeman says, I wish I had his career,
Yeah.
in terms of some of the roles he's had and
Yeah.
the opportunities he's received, he's worked hard for, that he's earned. But you haven't really seen, like, even though there's a lot of movie stars, you don't really see, it's so weird. You don't really see the legacy actors that in this generation or that I feel like you've seen in older generations, if that makes any sense. I think that's why there's a reason you could put a Harrison Ford in the role that a William
Mm.
Hurt can, because like, yeah, he's Harrison Ford. But why can't you do any think of anybody else that could possibly play if if Disney didn't make that announcement, right? Because they kind of backed themselves in that corner.
Mm.
Like, we won't cast T'Challa, and they know they're gonna look crazy if they don't stay 10 toes down on it,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's the same thing with Jonathan Majors. Like, he's not coming back to
Oh well,
MCU.
there's been rumors that he might be coming back. They
Well,
consider
maybe
it.
they don't sound.
There's rumors. I
Maybe
don't
they
know.
don't stay 10 toes down on everything. And I think if he didn't have the controversy he had, that could have been someone you could see, because he does play roles you're like, oh wow, he's definitely one of those actors.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I definitely feel like John Boyega is one of those actors. And so many that have fallen off because people just don't like Stephen James,
Yep.
Cheddar Ejiofor and David Aiello. They get opportunities, but it's like they just, you know what I mean? Jeffrey Wright's he's a kind of at the tail end of that Denzel generation. So
Yeah,
it's
he's
kind of like he's
he's
like
ushering in the he's in I'm using this other guy too because he's just hitting his stride, but he's been acting for so long. Sterling K. Brown
Sterling K. Brown and Mahershala
and
Ali has
Mahershala,
been.
they're
I
a
think
little bit
that
more mature.
they're mature, but it's like that's the thing. We didn't get to. My mother can remember Denzel Washington before he got his teeth straightened. So it's like, this is so people have followed Denzel for so long. But how many actors can people say, even here's a good example before we move on to the other portion of this. Anthony Mackie is getting ready to play Captain America.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember running into him at the LA Jazz Fest because he dated a former friend of mine. And I can remember girls in line. At this point, he had done She Hate Me. He had done um,
At that point, he didn't do the Hurt Locker. You said
I
it
don't think
right.
he had done the Hurt Locker yet. And I can remember girls being like, that's the guy.
Yeah, he's that guy. He's that guy.
And there's a lot of black actors right now that are like
Oh, whoa, whoa,
this.
whoa! We forgot Don Cheadle too.
Don
I
Cheadle.
hate I hate ever leaving Don
You
Cheadle
can't
off
ever
a
leave
list.
because he's such an underrated actor.
But go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. And that's the problem, right? It's so there's been so many actors that, yes, they get opportunities, but they're not necessarily winning the awards, right? That,
Yeah.
so for instance, like I didn't see King Richard, so I can't speak on like a Will Smith's performance. But think about the black actors that have won Best Actor, right? Like Sidney Poitier, Denzel Washington, Jamie Foxx, Will Smith. There's kind of been this machine too behind them that has
Yeah.
really made sure, people they stay top of mind. But I mean, I still feel like Cheddar Ejiofor was robbed from
Mm.
12 Years a Slave. I mean, there's this scene in the film, and the reason it's staying on top of my mind is because we were actually going to talk about the director of 12 Years a Slave. But I think the reason why, and this is because the Academy still has so many things they need to work out within themselves, but there's a lot of people that don't look like us that these scenes wouldn't have resonated with. But when he's awaiting word of how much longer he gonna be on this plantation, because this man has been 12 years a slave.
Mm.
I think from a human standpoint, what stood out to me acting wise was you felt the anxiety of knowing what, because one or two things was gonna happen. Someone was gonna show up to kill him because he was trying to make contact with someone that could prove he was a free man, or someone might save him. And we all have been in those situations of the 50-50 situation, right? Are we going to get the good news, or are we going to get the really bad news? Now, even though that is so different from the gravity of that situation of this man being killed in slavery and never seeing his family again, or, him becoming a free man again, we've all had these life altering situations where it's kind of like, oh my gosh, this decision is going to impact me in this place. And the fact that he could emote that without speaking, that alone, Oscar
Mm.
denied. So then, like, because that would have set Cheddar Ejiofor to me in a different type of bracket
Yeah.
than oh, what about that guy? You know, he's like still the snap guy,
He's
right?
still that guy.
You know, even Don Cheadle talks about how he doesn't have to give an alias when he goes to hotels and stuff because people are kind of like,
Yeah.
Don Cheadle. So, you know, and he is in the MCU. So that's another person, right? Like Samuel L. is a movie star, bona fide movie star. Definitely feel like there's roles that he could have been nominated for.
Yeah.
So these are things, but like again, he's the Denzel generation, right? They're all
Yeah.
getting a little, you know.
Well, I was gonna say this. It seems like originally, so you had Sidney Poitier and who else was acting around that time?
I think Harry Belafonte did
Harry
some acting,
Belafonte,
yeah.
right? So you had two.
But
Then,
then, like, think of how women talk about them. I mean,
well,
that's the unfortunate part. Looks do play a big part.
listen to what I'm noticing the pattern. And yes, looks do play a big part. I mean, now you got three, right? Like we have older generation. We have Denzel Washington, we
Yeah.
have Samuel Jackson, and we have Jesus Christ, and you just kept saying his name. Now I can't think of it. Morgan Freeman.
And did you say Forrest Whitaker?
No, now that's the next one. Right now we're gonna go into the Denzel Washington. I mean Forrest Whitaker.
Okay, let me see something.
Because Forrest Whitaker's a little younger. I would put him with the
They're
Don.
around the same age, aren't they?
I thought he's closer to like Don Cheadle,
We'll see in a minute.
like 60.
Hattie McDaniel, they're claiming were around that time. Dorothy Dandridge, because he did act opposite Dorothy Dandridge. But you know, these were so he was like he really was a trailblazer. That's what makes Sidney Poitier such a because it was one of those things where things were starting to enter like they really weren't fully integrated and he was, you know, acting opposite white women and you know, those because you
Oh
know
yeah, no, I know that he. I mean, the roles that he was willing to take on was pushing boundaries that definitely
mm-hmm.
were not seen ever on a big screen. But I'm just talking about like looking at when you talk about the engine that push black actors in each generation,
Right.
you know, to make them into superstars, right? Like we're not talking
You're
about
right.
just
Forrest Whitaker is younger than Denzel.
yeah,
I didn't realize how much younger.
yeah, like
He was the early. He was born in the early '60s.
yeah, so I figure he's closer to like Don Cheadle's age. He's closer to so but you know, looks do play a part and like I said Denzel Washington admittedly so has superior looks than a lot of other actors. But you know, like the engine never really got behind a lot of them. I mean, next one is Will Smith, right? Like, so you have Denzel Washington and Will Smith. And you're right. Like now, Michael B. Jordan would be the next one that I feel like there's an engine behind him pushing him to stardom, right? Superstardom. Now, I'm not talking about skill level. We can all argue who's better actor, who's not, but we're just talking about that engine to make them into superstars where they have that legacy of like, oh yeah, you know, that Will Smith, like I said, defining an era legacy where you can have multiple white actors who define an era. I mean, Halle Berry as well was one that defined an era as well. So now, you know, you do have a lot of great actors who seemingly aren't getting great opportunities, right? Like you know, you name like the younger ones like John Boyega, um,
I feel like ever since he spoke out about
George Floyd, right?
yeah,
No. Well, also he had some weird relationship with Disney too. You know what I mean?
and that's why your subscriber rates is going down.
Um,
Because y'all know y'all need to get y'all weight up. Like seriously, in terms of some of the stuff that y'all are like, why did y'all decide not to do Blade? Would love to hear the explanation behind that. Oh, we're gonna make less projects a year. Why did one of them have to be at a black project? Y'all tried it, and
let
it,
me rein you back in because we're losing the point. So you're against recasting T'Challa because
if it's a John, like I want saying who it's gonna be. I think
black
I
communities
think the fan
should get the
I think
vote
the
on
fans should get the vote.
who the next T'Challa should be.
No, you know what? Make it the son, and then that way it could be John Boyega. Anybody else could play.
But that won't be T'Challa. That'd be Black Panther.
Same difference. His
Okay.
name, the son.
Prince something. I don't.
Well,
I
way to
don't.
stay on top of it, honey. T'Challa's kid.
Oh my God, T'Challa's kid.
T'Challa's son. Toussaint.
Prince Tucson. That's
Mm-hmm.
okay.
Oh,
Um,
he's so cute.
Okay, so you really don't have you feel is that really your stance though? Like if you recast, you should the fans should get the vote on who recast it.
No, my thing is, I think we should let it. I think Chadwick Boseman did such an excellent job with that character. You know what you need to what these studios need to do if you want to recast T'Challa. Honestly, if I'm going to answer this question because I've frustrated uh Rel this entire.
Because I don't even know if you ever answered actually.
I think you should wait a generation. Cause see, that's the problem with y'all. Y'all don't even wait a good generation to recast stuff. Y'all do stuff within a 10-year span,
Mhm.
thinking that's a generation. A generation's like what, 25 years?
Yeah,
And then you're like, oh, now I want to remake a movie. It was only made 6 or 8 years ago, and the people that you made it for aren't even full adults yet,
yeah.
and you expect them to follow you into the darkness. No, I don't think so. Like, I think you should wait a full generation to reboot Black Panther if you want to do it.
I
That's my opinion. Because, and then I'll leave it at that.
my opinion,
Oh yeah,
if I do get to speak,
it takes so long for you to get there.
I like to think before I speak. Um,
So do I.
you do
I
you
did
think a
think.
lot and you speak a lot too.
I really didn't like you right
I think I honestly am going to go against the fans and say, no, don't recast T'Challa. And the reason why I say that is you kind of did touch on this early in the conversation about trusting Ryan Coogler and the writers of the franchise
there.
to complete the story. I think he has a vision, and I think this is what will tie into the next topic, which I do want to ask you. He has a vision. He was given authority and license to create this film version of T'Challa and Black Panther.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
He was given the trust of the license. So we as fans should trust him to complete the story, even though he was thrown obstacles that he wasn't expecting. And if he still has a vision that doesn't include recasting T'Challa, then let's trust him, see it through, and then we can, as fans and as the studio, can all see what will happen next as far as, like you said, letting a generation pass, letting it get through. And if it's a reset with the multiverse, if it's something like that. But I say, and this is what brings me to the next question, which I do want to hear your opinion on, is um my personal opinion is you don't necessarily, when you're making a film, you shouldn't force yourself as a creative, as a
Mm-hmm.
filmmaker to stay 100% faithful to the source material. And I know that breaks a lot of people's hearts. I know a lot of people are sitting there like, no, but it's I grew up reading this and I this and that. But this is like every creative, every storyteller, what Shayla will touch on, has their own vision, has their own experiences, has their own um vision of what the story should be. So I feel like you should trust, you know, the and I know, like, when you're an author, when you, because it could go left like James Patterson, right? It could go way left where they wanted Alex Cross to be a white man when they first tried to option his book, and he said F you, get out. And and he stuck with Alex Cross being a black man, and now obviously we have Cross, which is a terrific series, and we have
Y'all was
several.
wrong for that too. Whoever was trying
Yeah, I forgot the company. He
to
did. I think
change
he even
that.
said the company
I
too.
mean, gosh, like, why can't there be black characters? Like, what is so offensive of seeing black people?
Well, now here comes the argument, and this is a whole different question of marketability, right? At that time, they felt aside from them possibly being racist, they
Yeah, it's
felt that
definitely racist.
black actors and black characters aren't as marketable as white ones. However, obviously with the success of
Black
Black
Panther.
Panther and other successful films, most recently, just one of them days
Yeah.
being a number one film, we're showing that we will come out and support, and we want to see more of ourselves in the big screen. So but at that point, they only see the world in their color, so they didn't feel that that character was marketable. Which, come to find out, it's one of the best series on television. Cross, you should check it out on Prime. and some of the best films have been made, minus the one with Tyler Perry, have been made
Oh
about
my
Alex
gosh.
Cross. So, um,
Messed it up from an acting standpoint. This when you know it's time to pack it in.
so I want to hear your thoughts on, as you are a writer and you're a producer and you have tried your hand at directing, producing, and writing, right? Like
Ugh.
you have had your hands in all these pots, and you have a unique, and you are a reader too. You know, like, so you read some of fantasy books and stuff like that that have been adapted, right? Like, so you have run the gamut of being a fan, a director, a writer, a producer. You have run the gamut on all facets. How do you feel about filmmakers staying true to the source material or deviating for it? Now, I'll give you a little heads up. The fans are really pushing now for films and filmmakers to stop, and writers to stop deviating as much.
Well, first of all, if you know, look, think about anything from source material. Don't complain about 3 hour films if you want people to stick to source material, because that's how you end up getting 3 to 4, 3.5 hour films. To me, I think it does speak to the strength of a storyteller if you can fit a story in 2.5 hours as opposed to
Mhm.
three. Like it, there is a reason certain things need to be not cut out for, I guess, need to be redacted
Mm.
from the material, because you can't have every character in there, you can't have every beat in there. We understand this because when we work on a series, we are given a time, a show clock, and it's like, this is the
Mhm.
minimum you're supposed to fall into, because they're thinking, it all comes down to, and it's different with films, I know, but with series, you know, and especially now these streaming platforms are doing it, advertisers are paying for this time. So when you have a series, you've got to go to break to give those people that paid for your show their 30 to however many seconds of commercial time, per commercial break. So if you have a commercial break that's 1 minute or 1.5 minutes, they've got to get that time in there where they actually get an opportunity to tell, to pitch their product to you. So that, what when you sit down to watch an hour-long show and you're like, oh, it's gonna go to commercial. If you watch it on television, I know most people don't watch it on television now, but it's the same concept as YouTube. Unless you pay for YouTube Premium, you get commercials. That's paying for that what you're watching. So when it dips into that, that is because that particular advertiser has invested into that program or that platform or that piece or that project, so that way the bills are getting paid, for lack of a better term, right?
So you have to take into account the business element of filmmaking.
And I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand, is that, so when you sit down and watch something and it's like, oh, streaming has kind of interrupted this traditional model, like I said, because you can pay for ad free models. But when you, in traditional television format, it's, so if you have an hour-long show, it's going to be about 40 some minutes. The only time it's an additional 10 minutes or so is what they're now calling a supersize, if you're
Mm.
a little bit bigger and you have a little bit more time. the but outside of that, you're not going to get anything. The only time you're going to get a series that's an hour long, or an episode that's an hour long or more, so without much commercial interruptions, if any, is streaming.
Mhm.
Now, the reason, but there's still, you don't put everything in there either, because one, as a storyteller, what are you putting on it that's your own, that is unique to you, or something, you telling your story, if you're putting everything, including the kitchen sink, in there? I never, like, I, when it works and when it doesn't. And if you want to stick to the source material, well, first of all, then you're asking for several films to get made if you're
Mm.
talking about comic book by comic book basis. And the experience that you're having in the comic book is always going to be different than the experience
Sure.
you're going to have on screen. It should be.
I mean, it's in
Because if
panels.
you're reading it from a comic book standpoint, it's not going to be too entertaining on the screen. So
Yeah.
there's things that and there's so much more dialogue. Well, not really, because it's very colorful, but there,
Now it's much less dialogue though
it is
in the
much.
comic book.
I know it is, because there's so much more
Yeah,
art
art.
artwork in
Yeah.
there. Okay, so you have more artwork and less dialogue. But at the end of the day, you have to keep in mind that those pieces have to be somewhat more connected
Yeah.
in a screenplay
Yeah.
than they're going to be, because there's only so much you can really show sometimes without using all the special effects and stuff like that with the transitions and
Hmm.
things. So you do kind of need some. Also, the reason it can't be completely adapted from the source material, everybody that's going to see these comic book films are not comic book fans. Some people
That's true
just
too.
like to go see a good comic book movie.
Or a good movie.
That part.
Or a good movie, right?
So if they're going to see it, then they need some exposition because they're not going home and reading that particular
Mm.
4 editions it was taken from. Just saying.
When you're converting a film, or I mean, converting a book, a novel, graphic novel, comic book, anything like this, certain structure that you need to have in order to make a good film, right? Like it has to have certain elements, it has to have a premise, it has to have um a climax, a conclusion, and certain, and sometimes in comic books and other books and other source material, you can kind of get away with their own type of rules, which filmmaking has its own set of rules as well. So you basically are creating something totally new based off of their source material. So that's why a lot of times it's not faithful. And for me as a fan, I just go in with an open mind to enjoy these pieces of art, because the film is a piece of art that is based on, or that's inspired by, a source material. But I don't go in there like, man, if he doesn't say this way, and I don't, it's going to be a horrible film.